Good afternoon, everybody. This is the latest edition of Right Now, the New Republic's daily show on politics and policy. I'm the host, Perry Bacon. I'm honored to be joined today by two of my colleagues, Monica Potts and Alex Shephard. Welcome.
Hey.
Thanks for taking the time. This is great. This is I think our eighth one. This is the first one we've had some of the staff on. It'll be a regular feature will be to have the staff on to talk about what's happening in the news and also their stories. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with Alex. Like the three of us, I would say, are not foreign policy experts. I'm going to say that, and if you feel offended, give the response. Say that in your answer. But I do want to talk about 2017 to 2020. Whenever Trump dealt with Russia, it was kind of like, well, he has this weird thing going on. Putin helped him win the election. That's what's going on. Maybe Putin has some secret information on him that he doesn't want to disclose. But we're now into a second term. So, we in the news right now. Trump met with Putin last week. This week, Zelensky and the European leaders. How do you view how Trump deals with Putin, with Russia, with Ukraine, with Zelensky? Is that a feature of is that a feature of Trumpism? Is that because he loves authoritarians? Is there something weird individualized going on? Or kind of how do you read when you watch the news about Trump and Putin? What do you think?
I mean, I think that the clearest way to understand American foreign policy under Trump, and especially in the second term, is that the president and his chief advisor are both real estate guys, and they think about it as a real estate deal. Trump is only like talking ever about land in this, and I think that you see a little bit of it as well with Trump's talk of when he chastises Ukraine for taking on a stronger country. I think that he has this sort of, and Putin shares it, right? They like to see the world the way it was in 1990 because it makes sense to them. And I think that for Trump, it makes sense to return the world to the way that it was in 1990. So I think to take a sort of long way around the question, I think that Trump, and you look at like the US aid cuts too, right? The one way of thinking about this is that it's a way of returning the world to a sort of multipolar way, a world, right, of dealing with this stuff. With Putin specifically, though, he likes that he's an autocrat. He seems like a strong, tough guy. He is not like Emmanuel Macron, who's like a little, guy bouncing around Europe in his hydrofoil. He murders his political opponents. He like the generals that fail him, fall out of windows, and Trump respects that. And I think that on the left, there's been this like long-standing effort or say among Democrats to overcomplicate the Trump stuff by accusing him of something salacious. And you're just like, no, Trump respects him and he wants the world to return to the way it was in 1989.
Monica.
Yeah, I agree with that. In addition to that, I would say he wants the world to return as it was in 1989. And also, the world didn't exist before 1989. So there's no historical sense of what it would mean for Ukraine to, cede any land to Russia. So it's just like Russia's strong, Russia won. I like dealing with Russia because the world is just the US and Russia, and that's it. And just do what Putin says.
How do you think the left, Democrats, how should we think about what's happening right now?
That's a harder question because I think that, well, there's so much going on. It's hard to sort of know how much energy to devote to this. I mean, obviously, an authoritarian power grab in an independent country that wants democracy, that wants to be part of Europe, that wants to engage with the broader free world, that doesn't want a dictator in the form of Vladimir Putin coming in and taking over. I mean, I think that um, obviously we would support that, but where can the left go? Like Trump has Republicans have Congress. Trump doesn't want to send more troops or more aid to Ukraine. Trump doesn't want to send more weapons to Ukraine. Trump wants Ukraine to come up with a deal and cede Crimea and maybe some other pieces of land. And so I just, other than sort of saying this is really bad, I don't know what we do about it. So that's where I am, I think.
But I do think that the way that this is being undertaken matters because, the deal that they're going to get, I think it's still unlikely that they get one, but if they get one, it will involve, territorial cessation, not a complete takeover of Ukraine. But if you're listening to like Sergei Lavrov, who's like the Marco Rubio of Russia, if you're listening to what he's saying, right, they aren't going to really tolerate a Ukraine that is, aligned with the EU or NATO anymore. And I think that like you're still setting up, especially the deal that Trump is looking at, you're setting up a confrontation with NATO-aligned countries in the next decade, right? You're setting up a Europe that is rearming itself, and you're certainly setting up, a European theater here that I think is like looking more dangerous than it has since 1945. I think for Democrats, the question is, what does this mean politically? And I think I was watching Mondaire Jones talk about this on CNN, and he was sort of saying, oh, this is this big losing issue for Dems, and it always has been. Americans don't like the fact that we're giving billions to Ukraine. I think he's loosely right, but I also just think that Democrats are often really bad at really reading polls. I think it's like Afghanistan, right? I think they read the polls badly there too. Americans were sick of, also providing billions in aid to a project in Afghanistan that they knew that there was no success, right? It's the same situation as in Ukraine. There's no way of winning in Ukraine, right? It's just a question of how much you lose. It's also true there. And they looked at the polling and said, okay, people want Americans out. They did it. And then Americans were like, hold on, not like that, right? And I think that the not like that is the thing that confuses a lot of establishment Dems and like pollsters. But like Americans also don't want to see Vladimir Putin has a 4% approval rating, right? Everybody hates him. They don't want to see him win. And I do think that the Trump like Putin bromance is a effective line if done correctly. And I think we're going to talk about the situation in Washington, D.C. later. But I think it also matters because you're also setting up this idea of Trump as an autocrat, right? So I think that like from a policy perspective, the way that this peace deal is like really bad for Democrats going forward, or just bad for the world going forward and setting up a future confrontation. But it is also, I think, a way that they can talk if they can do it effectively, not as like Trump as Putin's puppet or like a lot of the gross homophobic stuff that you see. But just to say, like, look, Trump is the guy who loves autocrats, right? He's treating America the way that Putin treats Russia. That's bad.
I did
Yeah.
have on my bingo card that the person with no Putin's poll numbers would be not the 538 alum, but Alex. So I didn't see that coming. Good for you. All right, so the National Guard is what I want to move to next and talk about that. So I know you guys are not in DC, neither am I, but I'm following this very carefully. Okay, so if I think about Trump does lots of things I don't like and agree with, but don't agree with. But on a scale of 1 to 10, to me, sending the National Guard into a city like this is probably like a 9.7. Maybe what happened November 2020 and up to January 6th, maybe the actual 10. But this is really alarming and distressing to me. Am I seeing this correctly? Monica, start with you.
Yeah, I think this is really bad. I mean, I don't live in DC, but I used to live in DC now, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting and terrifying to see troops parading through a neighborhood like Georgetown, which isn't about it's not about crime. Like, people need to stop talking about crime. This is not about crime. This is about the image of federal troops marching through urban neighborhoods in a city, and what seeing that does to people, which is that it scares them, it unnerves them. They don't know what to do about it, and it might make them a little less eager to leave their house and do their normal neighborhood things and do their normal life things. And I think that it's just another power grab. It's another way that Trump is trying to consolidate power by sort of flexing this like national muscle in a city he doesn't like, and he wants to broadcast to his supporters who live in suburbs in rural America that he's a tough guy, and they want to see people's rights being trampled on because they don't like protesters and they don't like liberals. And it really has made me super angry and upset every day. And I think that's what the purpose of this is, partly.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the like central premise of Trumpism, right, is that the country is fundamentally broken and dangerous and crappy because for, let's say 50 years, members of both parties have taken the easy way, or they've taken, sort of convoluted policy paths. And that's why we have rising crime and drug infested streets and immigrants everywhere. And the only way to fix that, you may not like it, but the way to fix it is by extreme action. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in this term is that Trump is now surrounded by people who are willing to take that kind of action to communicate that they're doing it, right? And I think that I was thinking a lot about Chris Murphy's appearance on Meet the Press on Sunday, where he referred to this as a stunt, right? And I think that like on a basic factual level, that is correct, right? Like this is a power play, but it's mostly designed to it's like the wall, right? The wall didn't do shit, right? From an immigration perspective, it was a very bad way to reduce undocumented immigrants at a huge cost, but it appears like you're doing something. And the point is also that it's something that's bold and tactile. And this feels the same way. But I think to Monica's point as well, like where I think this is the Democratic messaging is still not quite there, is that this is just shocking, right? I mean, these are, I've been talking to friends who are, military veterans who are saying like, there are, armored vehicles on the streets of DC that we wouldn't have taken through the streets of Afghanistan, right? And because they're off-putting, they send the wrong message. And I think that, that's where the messaging here is failing, is that, even if the actual, like, there was a thing going around too, like day one, they arrested, 49 people. It's half as many people as they had arrested the same time 2 years ago or something. And you could say, yeah, this is hilariously ineffective on one hand. On the other hand, like, that's not the point, right? The point is that you've got armed troops and armored vehicles, outside Union Station, right? And the message here, I think that it's sending is totalitarian, basically.
Let me follow something you said, Alex, which is like, because I was going to ask about that Murphy appearance, which also bothered me. I can't pin it down exactly why. But so
Yeah.
a lot of times Trump does something. I do think it's worth, in the first term, Trump would send a weird tweet out. We'd all go crazy. I think it's good we're moved on from that. But I think he's actually doing dangerous things now. So I want to ask both of you, like, often a Democrat, you see them on a Sunday show, will say, this is a stunt, this is a distraction. And by the way, prices are going up, economic issue X. I don't, maybe, I think there might be some disagreement here between you all, but where do you think about that approach? Stunt, distraction, talk about the economy. Because I think that there's good faith people who think that might be a good idea. And then, so talk about that a little bit.
Well, in fairness to Democrats, they ran a campaign last year that was like, Trump is an authoritarian who's going to dismantle democracy. And voters said, but my eggs are expensive. And so I kind of understand why that may be what they think is a winning message. But I think it sort of misreads the moment and also misreads how people react to the current state of politics in any given situation. But I think the other part of it, I would say, it is a stunt sending tanks into DC. That is about the optics of it. But stunts can be super serious and terrible and terrorizing. And so I think that's what people miss, is that the vast majority of people don't engage in politics in this sort of like very the optics and the stunt may be the first and only thing that they see, or it's how they react to politics first, is what they see on TV. So I don't know if it's worth it to try to say, but it's a distraction from these other various serious things that are going on. It's actually a very serious thing that's going on, as well as all the other things that are going on. So I think it's a really, I think it's worth fighting against more
Alex, I want to
than
ask a
what we're
question.
seeing.
Sorry. You wrote a good piece about prices and Senator Warren going on TV and talking about prices going up. So I wanted to ask you, you think the prices messages might be useful, right? You do think that the economy stuff can be important to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there's an affordability crisis in this country, and that the way that it's understood is by a lot of analysts and like political consultants is wrong, right? Because it's a big scandal. It's not just about inflation, right? It's treated as an inflationary scandal, but you're like, people have been complaining about the cost of things for, well, forever, right? But also, like, really, it was a big part of Trump's campaign in 2016. It was a big part of Bernie's campaign in 2016. These are longstanding issues. Democrats are better at fixing them, right? We have a lot of material evidence that that's true. And so I do think that Trump take egg, right, is actually like a pretty good message, like by and by. And it is ultimately the kind of thing that you do build a midterm campaign around. However, tanks in the streets of DC, one, just from like a moral, perspective, political perspective, it matters. It also matters that the president is doing this instead of, and like is waging a massive trade war, right? Inflationary trade war with the rest of the world for no reason while he's doing it, because it is not fixing this. So like, to the sense that it's a distraction, like, again, Murphy is right on the sort of the facts of the case, and that the argument here is that instead of trying to fix things, Trump is actively making them worse, right? He's doing all this other stuff. However, like the tanks in DC are not meant as this, like shiny object theory is what I think we called it the first term, that Trump was sort of concocting these things to purposefully distract. And that's just not true, right? It's not, there's no like rhyme or reason to any of this. I do think that like Trump just likes to generate chaos, and then he likes to claim to fix it, and like nothing is ever truly fixed, right, once it starts, because he can always then go back to it. It's just the way that he operates. But I think that it's not a good way for Democrats to talk about it, because you can also just tie all this stuff together. And I think that the other thing that bugged me about the Murphy appearance is I think it is fine to call us a stunt, right? But I think what isn't fun is, or isn't fine, is to use that as a sort of minimizing tactic, to be like, but this doesn't matter, right? And you're like, I mean, I think in DC you can say, one, it certainly matters to the delivery driver who is, like jumped by, 14 heavily armed ICE agents, right? In LA, it certainly mattered to people in East LA who were being terrorized for months, right? And I think the Democrats are not comfortable talking about this crackdown in those terms, which is to say that this crackdown matters because it's being targeted against brown people, right? It's being targeted against Latino immigrants in these cities, and they're still terrified of saying any of that. So instead, they just say, oh, it's also ineffective. It's all a stunt. The National Guard guys are just standing around playing Candy Crush. Well, you know what? They're not always doing that, right? There's a lot of guys who are riding around making people's lives hell.
Let me shift to what's happening in redistricting. So I think what's going on now is it looks like the Democrats in Texas will come back. The gerrymandering plan will probably be passed by the Republicans there, but California looks like they are moving forward to sort of come back and sort of gerrymander California. There's a rumor Indiana and other states moving forward. So this is going to be going on for a while. But I have two questions. The first for Monica being, well, let me ask. The first is for Alex being. And I'll ask two questions for Alex, one for Monica, two for Alex being, I'm shocked Democrats are actively moving forward aggressively, and so should I be shocked by that? And the second is, I gotta be honest, I thought Gavin Newsom was a useless buffoon, but maybe I'm wrong about him, so I'm open to rethinking that, or a blowhard at least. So hopefully, I love to have Gavin Newsom on right now with Perry Bacon, by the way. But anyway, but I'd like to hear yours. And then Monica, this plan in California still relies on voters supporting the ballot initiative to kind of undermine the independent commission on redistricting. Are we sure that's going to pass? That's an important step here. I think voters like the idea of fair maps in some ways because fair maps are fair. And so I think I want to ask it a little bit about, are you sure this thing can pass? Alex, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lesson as a longtime Newsom watcher with him is that, this is the Democratic Party's most ambitious and ruthless governor, right? In post Andrew Cuomo. I mean, they were always kind of neck and neck. And I think unlike Cuomo, who was very cunning and ruthless in his presentation of himself as a sort of a master of political maneuvering, Newsom has always been thinking about Democratic presidential primaries. And I think, you saw this during Trump's first term as well. He was very shrewd at positioning himself as a foil, right? And I think he was very effective at doing that in a way that Cuomo wasn't, right? Even during the sort of height of his powers during the pandemic. So I think that on the one hand, I think we shouldn't be that shocked. I mean, I don't think it's that different, frankly, than that we were all making fun of Gavin Newsom when he was doing a podcast with Charlie Kirk, right? But that was, in the early part of the year when the sort of weather vane was blowing towards sort of a moderating, more conservative Democrat,
Right.
and Newsom reads the weather reports as well as anyone else. I do think that, maybe to lead into Monica's thing, that there are some choppy waters ahead for this, and I think that Newsom, as usual, is very, very effective at positioning himself, where he wants to be. Let's say it's not always the right place, but he gets there, and he can sort of loudly proclaim that he's doing what he thinks Democrats want to be done, national Democrats. Whether or not he can actually do it, I think, is a completely
Let me
other
press
question.
you away from the Newsom part of it. It's not just Newsom is doing it, the whole party's behind this.
Yeah.
It looked like I thought you'd have a Barack Obama or something like that. Gerrymandering is bad, lecturing and proving how neutral they are. So you've got the whole party behind this. Are you surprised by that?
I mean, I am. I mean, I think certainly I'm in New York, and like I'm a Western New Yorker, so I've known Kathy Hochul a long time, and this is not what I have seen or expected from her either. And I do think that that is the biggest change, right? I think that if you look at the Obama presidency, right, you see sort of the high point of of liberal Democrat power that was basically undone by unwillingness to see the Republican Party now for what it is. And I think that, you can look at basically the period after, let's say, the breakdown of the Gang of Eight immigration bill, of the Democratic Party slowly waking up to that fact. You saw glimpses of this during the Biden presidency as well. I think there too, there was a bolder agenda that was ultimately undone, right, by two Democrats, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, who saw things a different way, let's say, very charitably to them. And, I think that the party's just moved to the realization that the Republican Party is not going to return to fairness or normalcy, right? And that the only way to respond to a party that wields power in this way is to use power in a similar fashion. I think it's the right way to do it.
Monica, the
Yeah.
Biden is passing.
Yeah. So I think Politico did a poll that found that 2/3 of California voters, or almost 2/3, support keeping the maps fair the way they are. But I think what may help Newsom is that this is supposed to be a temporary measure. He is only proposing to do this until the 2030 census. And when framed that way, he might get a little bit more support. And I think that explains also his really rigorous campaigning about this, and national Democrats getting aligned with it, because it might be a thing that's temporarily unfair to California voters. You could make that argument, but we're talking about a national system that is right now unfair for the majority of voters in the country. And so I think that that's how they're framing it. And that may sway voters in California who at least want to see Democrats holding their own, because you have a system where the vast majority of people in many elections are voting for Democrats, and Republicans still are retaining all the levers of power on a national level. And so I think that may be what carries the day. And California has the ability to do this with the referendum process. And so I think that's why you see people lining up behind it. And just as Alex said, the recognition that Democrats are not going to be fair. This is not normal times for democracy. It's time to kind of pull out the emergency and maybe fight a little, get into politics, like really down and dirty politics.
So in there. Anything before we go? Anything you want to plug? Any pieces you want to note? Any piece you read, either or you wrote, or something you read, or anything you want to tell the audience about? I'll plug myself. Monica wrote a great piece about ballot initiatives and how they're not the panacea. About how ballot initiatives are being pushed in red states by sort of blue people or progressives in a lot of cases. Sometimes they work, raise the minimum wage, getting abortion rights, but often red states undermine them. So ballot initiatives may not be a panacea. But please read the piece, which I've now spoiled some, but it's still a great piece. Hope you read in detail. Anything you guys want to plug before we close out?
I was going to plug that.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
I'm hard at work on our November, what I think is our November issue now, or October issue, excuse me. So it's a really good one. I don't want to say too much about it. Also, I will plug my friends at Hellgate too, if people are interested in the New York City mayoral race. They're doing the best coverage of it, and also I'm playing softball with them this evening, so they're great.
Right, great. Good. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on, Alex and Monica. Audience, thanks for joining us, and we'll be here later in the week on Right Now. Bye-bye.